I think we're waking up to the reality that there is a before Brexit and a post-Brexit world, and this is not necessarily positive. It's a little bit like the KT boundary, the boundary between the Cretaceous period and the periods which followed, the tertiary something or others. But, and in that particular case, 60 million years ago, I think, in the Yucatan Peninsula, the asteroid, which was bigger than Mount Everest, plunged into the Earth, making a huge crater and sending up this dust cloud which covered the Earth and produced an extinction event, which has never been repeated, really. And there is a question about whether or not all the dinosaurs died at that particular moment. All the dinosaurs except for the bird species died at the moment of impact. Well, probably not. Probably some of them lingered on. Some of them may even have lingered on for 100 years, 1,000 years, in some strange pocket, some strange lost world, like something out of Arthur Conan Doyle or Michael Crichton. Actually, more Arthur Conan Doyle than Michael Crichton. But the KT event, the boundary, the KT boundary, is decisive in the same way that the Brexit referendum was decisive. And 6 years on, I don't recognise any positives out of that event. There may be ways in which our country lingers on, Britain lingers on in some form, but that event, that referendum, was seismic. And I think it not only has split Britain away from Europe, as was seen by the language Ursula von der Leyen used the other day in Dublin, it's also, I think, fracturing Europe itself. And I don't think the war in Ukraine would have been possible without Brexit. That is my frightening and worrying summary, conclusion. I don't think Putin would have ventured into Europe had we been more unified. We can play the blame game. I would definitely want to heap a huge amount of blame at the feet of Nigel Farage, or David Davis. But however pugilistic they may seem, however stubborn they may be in attacking other people rather than themselves, David Davis had a great standoff the other day in Parliament with John Nicholson. They'll pick their own fights, they'll find alternatives, they'll find diversions. But when history is written, the main event of the last 20 years will be Brexit. And it will be one of those decisive and politically annihilating. It will be a wipeout event. It will lead automatically, I think, to the breakup of the United Kingdom. It may well lead to the breakup of Europe, and nothing positive. So I think it was right to have the debate that led up to Brexit. I think it was wrong not to have a more robust Remain debate. The debate which was put forward was defensive and economic and entirely uninspiring. And the debate that should have been put forward was about responsibility and about duty and about integration and about keeping war out of Europe. And of course, that's exactly what we've invited. We've invited war into Europe. With the fracturing of the European Union, war has come into Europe again, and we should not be surprised. And that is our doing. That is the doing of Brexit. Sorry to be so miserable on a Sunday morning. But I think there are times when you have to rake over the details, because this last week we've had two big storms in a teacup. One was the lady Susan Hussey, and the other one was the Ursula von der Leyen. And however you look at it, the second one was slightly eclipsed by the former. And I think in the end, Ursula von der Leyen would never have said what she said. However true, Britain's involvement with Ireland is nothing to be proud of. But however true those words were, they would not have been spoken had Britain been part of the European Union. And equally, I don't think there is a justified parallel, certainly not today, between Britain in Ireland and Putin in Ukraine. I think the fracturing of Europe is more important than raking over old history. And I think Ursula von der Leyen was ill-advised. But she is, in fact, of course, simply responding to the pressures being put on the European Union by the Northern Ireland parties and by the Northern Ireland Protocol discussions. And that, again, comes down to the extraordinarily ill-considered way in which Brexit was enacted. So the Brexit decision itself, I think, was seismic. The delays and the failure to negotiate a decent settlement and a settlement that works were the first fruits of that seismic event. That failure to negotiate a proper settlement was the equivalent of the sudden wipeout of the large dinosaurs. The tinkering around the edges will be the equivalent of all those dinosaurs hiding in caves. In the end, it will come to nothing. In the end, it will fracture Britain itself, and we will be the worse for it, I think. There is still an option that we can make the best of this situation, but the debates in Parliament are not going in that direction. The debates in Parliament are introspective and out of date. The British Parliament thinks that it's significantly more important than it is. It has voted for its own eclipse, and it needs to recognise that position, and it needs to negotiate with Europe, and it needs to recognise that it has to restore connections rather than sever them.